your path looked on your journey.
I would love to tell you that, but I got a question for you. When you were
I knew you were gonna
watching,
flip it back on me.
I ask
Always giving,
questions.
always
I'm
giving.
curious. I'm curious. Wait a minute. Because you said you saw yourself on video. I'm curious. What did you see? What was it that sparked it? That said, this is not like what was going on physically in your body, in your mind, that made you say, I can't see myself doing this way anymore.
Well, I think it had been bottled up for a while, but I was looking for that thing that just tipped me over the edge. And so it was in a role play, it was in a scenario, and I just got to see how uncomfortable I was and how just didn't feel good about it. And afterwards, I went up to the instructor and I said, "What do you recommend? I know that this was one class. What can I do beyond this?" And those were the two recommendations she had. One was Toastmasters, which we know how that went. Incredible
Yes.
organization. I spent
Yes.
3 straight years. I founded a club at JP Morgan. But on the other side of that, she said improvisational comedy because there's no hiding there, and you have to figure things out, and you get thrown in. And it was one of the scariest things. I remember the first class. Not to go into too much detail because it's not about me, but it was a bright sunny day on a Sunday. I'd signed up, and because it was so nice out, I said, you know what? I don't need to do this just yet. So then it took another rainy day where I went to the first class, and then I just said, I got to do this.
Interesting. Interesting. Wow. Wow. Well, you asked about me.
Yeah,
I had to throw it back at you.
I
Had to
like
throw it
it.
back at you. In my professional career, I remember sitting at a meeting, and I remember sitting at this meeting for probably 20 or 30 minutes, and things were being discussed, and questions were being asked. And through my head were all kinds of responses and opinions and ideas. And they were sitting there in a lounge chair in the back of my mind. They would not look at my mouth because my mouth would not open and let out any of these ideas. And David, it makes me think about all of the people who sit at meetings, who sit at social events, who sit at networking events, who've got all these great ideas just trapped inside their head. And there's some level of doubt, something that is stopping them from saying it. And that was me. And then I started to pay attention to this one guy. His name was Artie. And even though he said things that were not necessarily in agreement with other people at the table, he said it. He opened his mouth. I looked at how people looked at him. I looked at how people nodded their heads. I noticed how people would listen and his ideas would get out there. And even when people didn't always agree, they listened and sometimes they started to change their mind. And I started to look at him, and I've never told him this, but I looked at him as a role model at that moment. And when I saw the effect that he was having on other people by just being comfortable and confident enough to bring up what was in his head, I thought, you know what? I got to do the same thing. And if at the very next meeting, if I could just push myself to say one thing, that would be an accomplishment. And eventually, at different meetings, I started to raise my hand and I started to speak up more. So I I'm very thankful for Artie for being a role model that he had no idea he was being at the moment, because
Yeah.
that incredibly helped me, you know? So I hope everybody's got somebody like that.
It's so funny. I mean, my friend of mine sometimes when she feels recreated or you just spoke inside my head, she'll say hashtag recreated. And as you were saying that, I said that's exactly the kind of feelings and chatter that was going on for me as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So
What's funny? I also think about these moments. David, we sometimes have these moments throughout our lives that carry with us way into adulthood and probably beyond. And when you ask about when was that moment, I also think about, and I'm big on talking about my childhood, right? I
yeah,
remember being it was probably the second grade. I talk about my teacher, Mrs. McIntyre, a lot. There's two Mrs. McIntyre stories. The first Mrs. McIntyre story is this. Mrs. McIntyre is the reason why I hate the song The Little Drummer Boy.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I hate that song.
Uh-oh.
So Mrs. McIntyre had us sing that song. I don't know, it must have been during the holidays. And Mrs. McIntyre was the type of person who could tell in a classroom of like 5,000 children, the one person singing off key. Me. So she stops the whole class. She said, "Stop. I want everybody to stop singing right now." Somebody's singing off key. And she looked around the room and she said, "Mark, I want you to sing by yourself." And David, the tears started falling down my face. I couldn't even open up my mouth. I was traumatized from that moment. Mrs. McIntyre made me never want to open up my mouth in front of a room ever again. Until Mrs. McIntyre introduced to us a storytelling contest. Each of us had to get up in front of the room and recite a story from, a fairy tale, a book, whatever. And I remember.
Wait, to clarify, is this the same Mrs. McIntyre, or you said there was
the same? This is the
okay.
same Mrs. McIntyre. So she traumatized me, and then she introduced me to the world of storytelling. And it's funny because now I talk so much about storytelling. So I have to give the credit to Mrs. McIntyre. And I remember standing up in front of the room, and I didn't have a story from a book. I don't know. I couldn't think of a book. So I remember writing a story. I was a big creative writer as a kid. And I told a story that had a reference to a famous Greyhound commercial. And I remember I said a line from this commercial and the class started laughing, but they weren't laughing at me. They were laughing with me. And that moment sparked something in me. And I found the joy of storytelling, and I've been telling stories ever since, David.
Love that. But then then we get into the corporate world, and so you went to the Shy. Was that clearly there's that Shy moment? How did that all flush out?
Well, I think what it was is I've been telling stories ever since, but I've been telling stories to myself, or I've been telling stories, in front of, because remember, I'm an educator. So I would tell the stories in front of students. The funny thing about educators is educators are very comfortable in front of their students, but not comfortable in front of their peers. So many educators will tell you, "I don't want to speak up at the meeting. I don't want to speak in front of an audience of parents. I don't want to speak in front of an audience of peers. Don't make me do it. Don't make me do it," right? But in front of the kids, they're good. So I found a lot of comfort in my professional career speaking in front of kids. And I do think that being an educator helped me to speak more often. But again, it was uncomfortable being in front of the adults until I saw Artie do it. And it was just, the time came to share my ideas.
Yeah.
And so that's why I finally stood up,
And then just to complete that progression, you started speaking up in meetings. Was that when you started other trainings or Toastmasters or other things, or that had already been somewhat
that was still way before Toastmasters. So I started speaking up at meetings, one comment at a time, 2 comments at a time. All of a sudden, everybody's like, "Oh, this guy wants to talk."
He wants to tell his story.
We have a meeting coming up. Can you speak to the parents about this? Can you speak at an orientation about that? And I was like, okay. And then I started speaking at assemblies and different things. And once again, using storytelling and using references to things that I already knew. And that started to make me feel comfortable. And then all of a sudden I got this reputation for speaking in the school, but only in the school. And one particular colleague that I was working with, she was actually in an MBA program, and she had to practice for a presentation, and she asked if I could help her with it. And then she was the first person ever to mention these 2 words to me: professional speaker. I was like, what? people get paid to speak and to share their ideas. And from that, she gave me a DVD about professional speakers, and they kept mentioning Toastmasters. So Toastmasters, 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 I joined it. And then probably even a little bit before that, I was asked by another teacher to speak to a group of kids. There's an organization called the National Society of Black Engineers. And they had a chapter in the school I was teaching, and they were doing like this regional conference, and they wanted someone to speak to the kids about public speaking. So I said, okay, but I didn't really have a program. And then I sat down and I wrote 10 different things that I thought a lot of people do when they speak well in front of people. And then I'm such a big fan of acronyms that I came up with a letter for each tool, and then the rules of engagement were born. And then as I got into Toastmasters, I started teaching the rules of engagement, and I started fleshing it out, and here we are many years later.
Beautiful. Love it.
Yeah.
Where do we go now? I'm just trying to think here. I mean, what else is like in your progression now? You're focused on, you said 4 things. I don't know if we covered all 4 of the points. So bringing it back full circle, I do listen from time to time. One other thing I wanted to ask outside of that, and which was I was just chewing on as you were speaking, is, and this is something I'm working on personally for myself and have given some thought to it, is initially I learned how to be a little more polished and outspoken from a look good perspective, but it wasn't always necessarily coming from the heart perspective. And I'm wondering if you have different experiences around that. Was it always that, because you come across very heartfelt and that comes through in how you communicate. So I'm wondering if it was ever not there, or it was something you had to discover, or was your heart always like authentically there? Because for me, what's happened, and I've worked on and broke through a lot of it, is I often come from here, like I can say nice things, it can come across polished, but it might not always be my authentic voice. So I'm wondering if you have a perspective there.
Here's a perspective from me when I think about that, and thank you for asking that question. I don't know if I've ever thought about it that way. I think for me and for anybody else, speaking from the heart comes from letting go of your head and letting go of yourself and accepting that the only thing that matters, or the thing that matters the most in a room of people you're speaking to, are those people. And, you know, someone once called me a people pleaser. I don't know how I feel about that particular word, but then again, maybe I am. You know, maybe we should be, as communicators, people pleasers, because at the end of the day, I want you and anybody else I'm speaking to be pleased, not with me, but with themselves, with the experience. Like, to me, it's so exhilarating for somebody to walk away from a conversation and to feel amazing about themselves. And so I guess I've always put the audience before me. And I think that's why. And you know, it's funny, David, because I'm huge into research. A coworker said this to me. She goes, "You like researching." And it's true. I like reading and I like throwing in all those things. But you know what? I love researching even more now than even facts and stats. And I look up stats and facts all the time. I still love researching stories. I'll read through a book and I will steal those stories and retell them 1,000,001 times, because stories get at the heart. Yeah. So again, I give Mrs. McIntyre all the credit in the world for allowing me to be a venue to tell the world that we all need to tell more stories, right? This is how the world...
My mind is firing in so many different directions. I want to like chip away at all of it. I feel like we could talk for hours. One thing that came up for me is the distinction head-heart with Robin's program. I know I brought that up to you from time to time, but he had us reflect on the human needs. And the two that distinguished for me was, one, a need for significance, where I need to feel significant, I need to be liked, I want people to see me as somebody who's cool or great or whatever it is. On the other side of significance is contribution. And that's what completely reframed it, exactly what you just said. It's not about me trying to look good or come across a certain way or have people like me. It's actually about contributing to other people. And when I saw the distinction about how I showed up sometimes in one world versus the other, I realized that underneath it, that's where I want to be. And that's where I'm really coming from. Underneath the cloak of significance is I am heartfelt. I want to be a contribution to other people. But that took a little bit of uncovering for me. It wasn't the natural thing. It was more, I need to protect myself, look good, get social. But then beyond that, it was the authenticity.
Well, you know what's funny about that, David? Looking good in front of people, I have found, is often synonymous with looking smart. It's very interesting to me because I've coached a couple of people and somebody said, I feel like I don't look smart. And there's something about being cerebral and being knowledgeable that makes people feel more confident. I actually think that's why we tend to search for the facts and the statistics and the historical data, because, wow, you sound really smart. And I think as a society, as a culture, we've latched onto that more so than, wow, you really made me feel great about myself.
Yeah.
You know? And listen, I'm the first one to say this. I never think we should be pitting one against the other. I don't think it should be the head versus the heart. I think it should be the head and the heart. I don't think it should be content versus delivery. I think it should be content and delivery, right? I don't think it should just be the idea or the expression. It should be the idea and the expression. So the fact that you may have started off heady, I think was fine, because now you're complementing it with the heart, and now that is making you a much more powerful life changer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there is a balance or a commingle between the two, but it's important to have both. You know, you could speak all from the heart, but it's all over the place. Message may not be well received, or you speak really great message, but there's nothing behind it. There's got to be that little maybe combination of both.
Listen, it's like the Transformers. Remember that cartoon?
Yeah.
We got to put all the pieces together, and it makes a much more stronger presence. I mean, we should really be doing that throughout the world with so many things, bringing people, bringing ideas, bringing everything together. Listen, man, this is why I'm loving sitting here with you, all these conversations. Together, we create some magic.